Welcome to the Spiritual, Sexual, Shamanic Podcast. Exploring sacred sexuality, activating life force, and empowered transformation, these intimate conversations take you under the sheets with faculty from ISTA, the International School of Temple Arts. I'm your host, Ria Yoshida, faculty and organizer with ISTA. Welcome, everyone. Today I have a very, very exciting guest. It is one of ISTA's top lead facilitators, KamalaDevi. So KamalaDevi McClure, aka KD, just the letters if it's a mouthful to say KamalaDevi. The pronouns are they and them, is a pansexual, genderqueer tantric mentor, speaker, and author of 7 books. They've been navigating a polyamorous marriage in San Diego for almost 20 years with their husband and family, who appeared in Showtime's hit docuseries, Polyamory, Married, and Dating. They've also appeared on Dr. Drew, Ricky Lake, Tyra Banks, and the award-winning documentary Sex Magic. KamalaDevi travels around the world teaching sexual shamanism as a lead facilitator for ISTA, the International School of Temple Arts, and touring 2 new books, Sex Shamans and 52 Fridays, a polyamorous, queer, kinky love story. They are also the creator of Tantra Theater and Polypalooza. KamalaDevi's mission is to awaken artists, healers, and visionaries to become love leaders around the world. And if you'd love to learn more, just go to www.kamaladevi, Devi.com. Welcome, KD. So excited to have this conversation with you. Just so you know, we sourced questions from the ISTA community, and there was an outpour of questions for you. And I also know that we have some really juicy topic lined up to go really deep into today. So if we can get to the questions at the end, we'll do some like quick fire questions at the end.
Sounds fun.
Great. So welcome. And it's so exciting to have you here. And when we talked about this episode together, we thought about going really deep into inner marriage. So tell us about that.
Well, the inner marriage is a holding of paradox. It's a bringing together of polarities. And so most people have, when they think of marriage, it's it's now being expanded from one man, one woman, which is really nice. That culturally, that's, beyond just the binary. But the inner marriage is not external meeting, but as Rumi says, lovers don't finally meet each other. They've been within each other all along. So finding the not just feminine and masculine and bringing it together, those poles, but I like to think of it as also the meeting of the animal with God and the wounded with the healed one. So it's a type of a embracing of our wholeness.
So good. So many directions we can go in. Yes. So in holding the paradox and the polarity, like what would be, in your experience, like the felt sense in your body when you're experiencing that?
I'm glad you're asking, because a lot of people think, oh, conceptually, I understand there's masculine and feminine qualities, and then they have this big conceptual like sense, but it is an embodied experience. It has to go all the way up, all the way down to be a true marriage. And the physiological experience is one of aliveness. So it's almost, here's another paradox itself, or contradiction, because people, when they imagine wholeness, there's a contentment. And I honestly used to think, being the kind of broken drama queen that I was, that inner peace was boring. I was like, oh, who wants peace? When you could have passion and you could have creativity and you can have all these other qualities. I'm like, fuck that. Peace just sounds like a, like a low bar or something. And as I've come through the various initiations, this practice of intermarriage has led me more and more to a fullness and an aliveness. And it is a contentment because it's a meeting of that which you're longing for, right? So we all have this unfulfilled longing, yearning, wanting for more. And then as you deepen the intermarriage, those longings get fulfilled within and without. You know, the more we know this in law of attraction, the more we fill up from inside, the more the universe reflects to exactly that back to us. And so we are fulfilled in our longing, and that's the opposite of boring. It's actually more alive and rich. And I find it very, it can be very playful to come into contact with your own energies.
Yes, yes, I'm really getting this. And what I experience in this, doing a lot of these practices that are taught or shared with ISTA through the transmissions, is there's a huge gap between the lived spiritual awakening and experience and the gap between putting it in words and communicating it in a linear way to make sense. And as someone who's the author of 7 books, you have mastered this gap in that way. And so how would you really support our listeners to feel into this gap of conceptual understanding versus like lived experience?
Yeah, it is. It's ironic, right? We're on a podcast, and what we have is language right now to try to transmit and share the ineffable. And so like when you say, that I've kind of mastered that gap, everything in me is like, no, like there is no words. Like every poetry is insufficient for the direct experience. And it's like the first line in the Tao Te Ching that what can be spoken is not the Tao, so that's why it's mystery schools. That's why these are the mystery podcasts. Like we're speaking into something that can't be spoken. And yet, all the pointing at the moon is important because it's the path, it's the journey, it's the moving towards that direct experience. So yeah, I could write 1,000 books and still just be approximating, some understandings along the path, but it is a vibration and a frequency that's understood in the in the breath. So right now, as you and I connect, and we intend to connect to our listeners, we know that there's a vibration, there's a frequency beyond time and space where other people are vibrating, and that life force energy has its way with us, and it fluctuates all the time, right? So sometimes we're awake, sometimes we're asleep, sometimes we're hungry, sometimes we're tired, sometimes we're horny, sometimes we're totally spent from cosmic orgasms. But that's what the life force does, like the tide. It just is in constant motion. And that motion is expanding. There is an awakening happening. And I know, as this is one of the early podcasts that we're doing, that expansion is more and more people waking up, to their own wholeness, their own God force. And that's what the sacred marriage is realizing that we are God, we are goddess, both. That's an experience just as real as it is outside of us, it's inside of us.
Yes, so spot on. What I'm learning is that the more personal, the more universal. And as a writer, when you really bring someone into a story from the first person through a character, it has a real impact. So I'd love to hear your personal journey of pointing to the moon on your intermarriage.
Thank you. Yeah, so it's such a deep truth that our stories, though individual, they're universal. And I'm feeling into which story to share, and I will share with you, because it's alive for me, the first time I met Baba Des, who is the co-author of Sacred Sexual Healing. And I had this experience of him, and I will genuinely say that he, although not the first person to introduce the idea of intermarriage to me, was the first like embodied guide for me. So when I saw him, saw immediately like, oh wow, he's got this feminine long hair, like sexy, like feminine way of being. And when I looked into his eyes, I saw him shapeshift. I could see like the flash of this like goddess crone, or sometimes a playful little girl, and it was very seductive to me to see this like, like tall, he's over 6 foot, man who's at the time running a conference, and I saw him in his power, but I could see the feminine in him, and so I found myself irresistibly attracted to that. And then I also know that when talking to him and getting to know him, I'm like, ooh, that's some crazy making, like that shit's crazy, because he has this experience of having in his own intermarriage like gone through a etheric pregnancy, and just stuff that blew my mind at the time. So I'm like, yeah, that's all good, but that shit's crazy. And so I share him as a guide because I remember early on a lot of the like seeking for who is my own inner masculine, and then finding a reference point in someone like him who was outside of me. And I was like, wow, that masculine who is a tribal leader really resonates with my masculine. And so I did do deeper work, which, I'll just point at an exercise that any of the listeners could do. It's like an active imagination where you're feeling in and you're visualizing your ideal masculine. What does that look like? What's that feel like? And for me, in a lot of ways, Des was that early on for me. But you're also meeting with your inner feminine. So it's like a goddess energy that comes together. And I'm bringing this particular practice up, and it's very valuable to have conversations between them, to bring it into like, how do they move? How do they walk? What's, the feeling? But then as I evolved into the practice, it was less about the outer, someone that I know that I idealize. Like in the case of the feminine, it was Alice Walker, who's a poet, and she's a pagan, and she had these earth mama qualities that I admired. And so I had these two outer figures coming together within me, and that's beautiful from the consciousness place. But the more we mature, the more we look down and we say, oh, but what about the marriage of the wounded masculine and the wounded feminine as well? Because inside of us we have some brokenness, and those parts often get left behind in the marriage or disembodied, and then we're fractured again. And so much of the intermarriage is coming into wholeness, so you don't want to leave out or resist or run away from the parts of us that we don't want to embrace. So in essence, the intermarriage is shadow work. Whether you're embracing the opposite of the gender you're born into, you're still embracing the non-dominant part of you, which is by definition shadow. Shadow is anything about ourselves that we don't consciously include in our own identity. By the way, important, side note, this is not about your sexual identity. This is not about your sexual expression or your gender this is really deep, personal growth work that may or may not reveal new flavors and frequencies of your identity and your orientation and your sexual expression, but that's not what we're talking about here.
It's so good. Yes, I love the really honoring the wounds. And I've heard you actually refer to wounds as your sacred wounds.
Mm-hmm.
And so what would you say, if you could put your finger on one of the biggest wounds you really integrated into your inner marriage?
So I was, I wouldn't say a tomboy as much as just a like, um, a very active, alive, curious kid. But I was the only girl in a household with three brothers and a, Mexican mother. And in Mexico, the culture was very much like the girls stayed in the kitchen and the boys were out running around playing. I wasn't allowed to ride bikes or go skiing or do a lot of those things. And so the I'm not allowed to turned into like a feeling of, just restriction because of my gender. So I would say there was a genuine gender wounding in my formative years. And the way that then, everybody has some kind of restriction that turns into, or limitation, or even a trauma that happened, and then it turns into a story, right? So what meaning do you make of that painful traumatic event or that pattern in your childhood? And the meaning I made was, you just don't understand me, because my mom was from a Latin culture and I was American, and American girls were allowed to ride bikes and ski. I didn't understand. She didn't understand, but I really felt misunderstood. And that wound, right? This deep sense of like, she doesn't get me. We had, this cultural clash. Not just my mom, but other people then didn't understand what was happening inside of me. As I worked to heal that, as I just, coped with it, I tried to seek to understand other people. It's like, ooh, what's happening under their skin? What are their emotional, restrictions, and what's happening with them, in their heart? And so what once was a wound turned into a superpower, which is I became extremely empathetic, extremely curious and sensitive and attuned to others. And then, obviously as a spiritual guide, I'm like coaching and mentoring and working with people. I wouldn't have that superpower if it weren't for that wound. So there is a kind of a healing that happens when we go back and we recover and we recognize, wow, the very things that injured us are sometimes cracks into our soul's gifts and what we're here on the planet to do. Because a big part of what I'm here for is to empathize, is to to feel the heart of humanity, to compassionate.
Yes.
Yeah. And so, not directly related to the inner marriage, but I would say that when we do embrace the disowned parts of us, then there's a reclamation that happens, and that reclamation can take us to new heights that are even higher than had we been injured. There are blessings. We go through those portals. Everybody knows that, right? Your breakdowns lead to your greatest breakthroughs.
Yes. So what would you say is a current common misunderstanding that you get about you that you'd like to just address right now?
Ooh, that's such a good question. And Ria, I'm so excited for you because I know, as this is our first podcast, I just have to tell you this. Barbara Walters was asked what makes her a great interviewer, and what's her favorite interview question. And she actually asks everybody she interviews, she's like, this is my favorite question, is like, what do people not understand about you? Or what's something that people think about you that's not true? That kind of thing. So here's a deep irony. I struggle to understand myself. And we all do. Humans are fucking complex. I recognize that there are so many aspects of me, not just the masculine, the feminine, the little, the inner child, so I feel like I'm an entire community of beings within one body. And not fully understanding myself gets projected onto anyone that loves me, like they don't understand me. And it's really just because I haven't fully gotten what's going on. So when I if I take time in the morning to do my practice, whether that's jogging or yoga or meditation or tarot, so I do a little centering, and then I start the day and I'm like, I'm really dropped in. I get myself. Then I spend a whole day feeling understood. But the day that I am having PMS and a little off and don't know what the fuck is going on, like, my partner's like, hey, how are you? And he could say something. Oh, I hear you're in a bad mood. And I'm like, he doesn't get me. And I'm giving this example a little bit crudely, I'm minimizing it, but I do genuinely believe that the thing that people don't understand about me is only that which I don't fully get about me. And ironically, I can't fully get to know me, like at the depths, like who we are as humans is incomprehensible. So this pursuit to be understood, I could write all the books I want, I could tell all the stories I want, and I'm never going to be fully understood because no human is. We're all still evolving. And that pains me, and it creates suffering in my life until I accept that incompleteness, accept that partial understanding, and accept that people understand to the capacity that they have. And I can only understand to the capacity I have, and to just be gentle with that. Looks like you can resonate.
Oh, yes. On so many levels. It's so incredible that you have this 20-year marriage with your partner, with Michael, and that you have a son together, Devin, who's absolutely divine and wonderful. So it's like the three brothers growing up and now being in a house full of boys.
Yeah, not only that, we live with Michael's father. So it's like,
yes.
and a boy and a cat named Kabuki. So I've got boys all over me again.
Amazing. And so, and what you're referring to just a moment ago are these blind spots, right? There's parts of you that you can't see yourself that get mirrored when others that you love don't understand you. It's a reflection of you're not understanding yourself. So there's this paradox or parallel or something's happening with your external marriage and your inner marriage, and like
I love that reflection, because as we're speaking right now, what occurs to me is so I have all this masculine energy around me. One of the stereotypes about the feminine, and we're talking archetypes, this isn't even me, it's like the feminine is so mysterious, right? The feminine is that which we don't understand. And that core frustration has a lot to do with my relationship to my own feminine. And the truth is, I think I'm closer to and understand my own masculine better. And that part of my own wounding is this, the relationship to the feminine. And I want to point this out because as people deepen in their path towards the inner marriage, a lot of times if you're in a female body, you'll think, oh, the inner marriage just means I need to awaken my inner masculine and get to know him. And the more I get to know him and embody him, the better relationship I'll have with men in my life. And yes, that's true. It's a partial truth, because you equally deeply need to understand the feminine. These are primordial forces within us, regardless of what body you have. And we want to develop both, because what will happen is one or the other will be more mature and developed. And, in many ways, throughout my inner marriage, it's the feminine that was most wounded and underdeveloped. I had, and this is, it's easy. Like I had this recognition of a male tribal elder, and I do these, writing books and teaching and even directing, like they were male kind of, not male, but I will say masculine archetypical energy will run through me to get shit done. And then the feminine would be just the big, question mark. So my inner marriage, although I'm in a female body, had a lot more to do with intimate encounter with the feminine and understanding her. And everybody's path is going to look a little bit different, but it's important to run both currents and truly mature, understand, embrace both.
Who in the ISTA field, if Des was your masculine representation that you really admire, who is like a feminine representation? And it could be in a male body that you really admire.
So who comes to mind immediately is Deborah Taj Anapol. So she was in a lot of ways like my shaman mama. She was the first woman to give me a sacred spot, and she's no longer with us in this realm, but she was an ISTA lead. And Deborah Taj Anapol was also the one of the pioneers of the modern polyamory movement. And so I saw her as a true visionary and she had it, and this is the feminine, right? Like she used to teach, would be in a circle, like a goddess circle, and she'd teach topless, and she'd have these pendulous, breasts like swaying as she gesticulated with her little, she had like chubby fingers. And like, I just saw her, and she's a rounder, smaller woman. Like I saw her as such an earth mama. And she was also a pagan Kali worshiper. And one of the most profound teachings, I will say, that she offered me, many teachings. I recommend her work, but one of the most profound ones was about her relationship to ecosexuality, which is, running erotic energy with the planet, with the planetary energies. And she blew my mind by taking me away from the concept of Mother Earth, and not just into Lover Earth. Like I got that shift deep from Annie Sprinkle, but from Mother Earth into, hey, this is a hermaphroditic planet. And as long as we treat her just as Mother Earth, we're going to mistreat her because the feminine on the planet is wounded. This is also Father Earth. And, and really started a different kind of listening from me to nature, where I started to really see how much the planet provides and protects, and how present, he is for me. And that completely changed my marriage to the planet.
Great. So would you also use the pronoun they and them for the planet?
Oh, I love it. Yeah, that's a great shift. Yeah. And it's fun because people have a hard time with the pronoun they, them, assuming that, it is obviously a shift. I want to empathize, like it takes a while to adjust to it, but it's grammatically correct. When you don't know who someone is and you say, oh, they left early, or they took my umbrella, or, we say that about people when we don't know who they are. Which kind of leads us back to this thing of humans being incomprehensible. We don't know who they are, just call them a they. But I did want to say that on the plural singular syntax, I feel it more represents the shamanic perspective that we are multiple beings, that we're not just singularity. Well, it's, we're all one on the inside. There is a singularity, but they also encompasses the whole happy family of all aspects. And I celebrate how shamanically we can shape shift into different beings in different circumstances.
Yeah, it's really bringing up, for me, in the beginning of our conversation, we talked about how much you thought peace was boring. Mm-hmm. Right? And that actually it's much more alive to fulfill certain longings and yearnings and desires, and that it's much more like a mature way, perhaps, if there's a lack of a better word. And what I'm also getting in the pronoun conversation, or for the inner marriage, is we talk about masculine and feminine and these polarities and the complexities of it. And now we're talking about hermaphroditic planet and really coming. So there's some kind of parallel here between feeling alive in both the whole spectrum of the gender and the whole spectrum of longing, yearning, and fulfillment and bliss and finding.
Yeah, it really is a holographic reality. And it's, you know, each of us is not just a hologram of the whole, but our, you know, the way we know that now too about brain science. It's like the way that the brain is interconnected synaptically, you know, really is so interwoven into our reality. So without getting too far away from the inner marriage, I will say here's where the hologram applies most relevant. This is the most relevance. When we heal the wound between our masculine and feminine within, then it heals the wound in the outer relationships. So, you know, everything that we've talked about can sound like esoteric personal growth, but if you're suffering in any area of relating, whether it's your communication with your partner or not finding the right mate or having a pattern that reoccurs in your relationships, if you do this inner marriage work and you heal that within, then the instantaneous effects will be felt in your outer relationship.
Brilliant. Yes. And so on that note, I'd love to just fire some hot questions for you and just see what answers pop up. And
hit me.
Yes. Okay. So what are you reading right now?
I'm reading, oh God, I can't remember the name of it, but it's a book about privilege, you know, with the Black Lives Matter movement. I'm really wanting to look and inquire deeper into what my blind spots are around my privilege. Yeah.
Is it the White Fragility?
No, but I've been recommended that book.
Okay.
Yes. Great.
Cool. Yeah, great. And so what has been like the single most impactful thing in your spiritual journey?
Woo, that's a big question. It's a big question because I look at having various awakenings in my life, and it's a little bit like a shuttle launch, you know, like, ooh, this booster set off and then it launched to this level and then it launched to that level. And you know, when I really allow myself to be in the moment, and I mean, I have nectarines in the backyard growing off my own, you know, tree that I planted. And it's like when I bite into the nectarine and I feel the sensuality of that and I'm present for that, I have these like crystal moments of like, there is no great, you know, experience beyond this moment that I'm like waiting for something bigger, and it's like, it's here now. And so, you know, truly the most impactful awakening happens when I drop in through the doorway of, you know, this moment, because that's where this physical body and all of the different dimensions are most concentrated, are, you know, in the now.
If you were a piece of furniture, what would you be?
Ooh, that's fun. That's really fun. I am struggling to think of something less cliche than a bed. Maybe a piano. Does that count as furniture? I mean, it really is like the biggest thing in the room right now. And I do think about, like, you know, the different frequencies and all, and the whole scale. And that feels, yeah, like we're these, you know, we are each these channels and we play these different like notes and tunes, and life is like this big orchestra. So it feels like I'd be a musical instrument.
Spot on. So last question, in just a few words, like what does freedom mean to you?
Ooh, what a beautiful question. Freedom is a state, and it's a state of not just mind, but it's no mind. It's a state of not believing our thoughts, not being contained or defined by the interpretations and meanings, because we know that those are often conditioned and partial perspectives. And freedom is knowing oneself beyond the conditions of the mind.
So powerful. And so there were so many more questions that were asked about jealousy, navigating it, about bondage and kink. And what I found really interesting were questions about parenting in a polyamorous marriage and around sexual education with young ones. And so we're out of time for this episode, but this means we just have to have you back on.
That sounds great, Ria. I look forward to it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, KamalaDevi, for your time, for your wisdom, for your laughter.
My pleasure. And if anyone wants to hit me with more questions, you can go to KamalaDevi.com and find me there.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Yay. Namaste. Thanks for listening to the Spiritual, Sexual, Shamanic podcast. To find out more about ISTA's retreats, online festivals, or to work with our faculty, see our website, ista.life, or find us on Facebook at ista.life and on Instagram at ista_tribe.